We can just do that for 20 minutes. I don't mind.
Okay, I am so excited today, Sophia with us, to talk about mental health, to talk about being a founder, to talk about being a professional athlete in the childhood and all the other things that we're going to touch upon. So, welcome.
I'm excited to be
Amazing
here.
to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start at the beginning, which is what was your childhood like? What's your background story? Where did you grow up? Give us some.
I have to say I probably did have a very easy childhood up until about 16. And like I can admit, I'm very fortunate. I had two very loving parents. My mother is an Iranian immigrant. My dad is Polish. So I've never really known like where I'm from. You know, when someone says, where are you from? And you're like,
world.
I don't know because I don't feel English, but I feel like I'm from London. But I studied in the US and I speak Farsi and
love it.
I don't really know that much Polish, but so I don't know where I'm from. But my childhood was amazing. I think the only thing negative maybe about my childhood was that, and my parents agree, was maybe I was pushed a bit too hard, which made sense for when I turned 16 and had an eating disorder. But I think that's one thing is when you're, and I have said this to parents that I now work with, is just because your child is good at something doesn't mean you have to, make them the best every single time.
Did it ever come from you, like the sort of the perfectionist, like trying to, or do you really think it was the influence of your parents?
No, I think my parents wanted me to be happy. And I am someone that if I'm good at something, I do want to be the best. And I've always been told to be like, can we find someone to pull me back? So I do burn out a lot. And when it came to running, I wanted to do it. So running was a sport I used to do and I fell in love with it, but probably too much that I would do anything to get to the point of being the best, which included, losing 40% of my body weight. When I was 16. So do I think my parents contributed? Yes, they have great genes. They created someone who was good at running. But I think they were doing what every parent would want to do, which is you want to play tennis, play tennis. You want to swim, you swim. But slightly at the detriment of me down the line.
How did you overcome that?
The eating disorder or I think this is just an interesting thing is people assume with eating disorders you can just eat and suddenly you're fine. So the eating disorder stemmed from a weird place. I was swimming and then suddenly my parents and me realized I was really good at running and I had to lose a bit of weight. And I was like, well, I'm really good at this. I'm going to lose more. I was 16. And at the same time, my best friend jumped in front of a train. And no one had ever told me what death looked like for someone who wasn't your grandparent. And I think for me, I was like, wow, my life is so out of control. I'm like 15, 16. I'm meant to be sitting my GCSEs and I can't call my friend. So I think for me, food became a mechanism of control. But did I ever want to be thinner than I am now? No. So with my eating disorder, it lasted about a year and a half physically. And my parents were amazing. So pulled me out of sport. I went and got the best therapy. And at some point, something clicked in my head where I was like, I've lost my boyfriend. I'm barely seeing my friends. I'm not allowed to sit my GCSEs. I can't run. And something clicked in my head, probably with a lot of therapy, where I was like, if I can be the best at not eating, I can probably be the best at overeating too. So within 6 months, I was eating about 7,000 calories a day.
Wow.
To try and gain the weight back so I could compete at world trials. And did it, and it was horrible. Every woman's like, oh my God, I'd love to be able to eat whatever I can. You don't. So I'd have a dessert before breakfast, and I'd have breakfast, and I'd have a weight gain shake, then I'd have a dessert, then I'd have lunch. God. It was horrible, but I think it definitely set me up to realize that like a lot of things are going to be really, really hard. But I progressively saw positive outcomes from it.
Was that the first experience that then led you to build a project in the mental health space?
Yeah. So if anyone has ever Googled me, they'll see pictures of a 16-year-old me talking about mental health. So when I came out of my eating disorder, I realized, and apologies to my lovely alma mater, but my school were pretty shit. They were awful. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, sorry. But no one had taught any of my friends how to deal with me. No one had told me what mental health looked like. And me and my best friend, Amber, who's awesome, who's now coding in the mental health space, she and me kind of got together. We were 17 and we're like, we should really build a campaign. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? She was like, we should get mental health on the national curriculum. And I was like, you're right.
Hell yeah.
I was
Let's
like,
do it.
sure. So how do we campaign? And we sat down in this cafe in North London and wrote notes being like, reach out to Michael Gove, reach out to Jeremy Hunt, reach out to journalists. And as we were doing it, this man from the Jewish Chronicle in North London, this tiny unknown paper, was doing an interview. And my friend Amber nudges me, goes, go on. And I was like, I'm sorry. She's like, tell him we're doing a campaign to get mental health on the national curriculum. And I was like, with my little notepad, I went up to him and I was like, hi, I have an eating disorder and I would like you to write about me. And he was like, what's in it for me? And I was like, I promise you people will pick it up. So the week later, the article came out in that unknown newspaper. 2 days later, the Times, we were front page of the Times.
Wow.
And then we were on about 400 or 500 TV shows, like on media outlets, talking about having an eating disorder, why schools need to do better. And it eventually resulted in a national campaign that ended up in a peer-to-peer mental health education campaign nationwide. So
you're like, told you so.
I was like, I just need to go and find someone in a cafe. But I don't think we did anything special, actually. I just think we were the first people at that time to go like, I have this and it's not a problem that I have it. Why is no one talking about it?
But it's so often, being an entrepreneur, like that's what it's like, right? It's like paving the path that is not there and being brave enough and being courageous and confident enough to go somewhere where no one else is going. And then you realize there are so many people behind you that actually have the same problems and the same questions and want to follow you, right? They just don't necessarily have that energy to take the first
It's
jump.
the first step. It's that first step, and it is honestly petrifying. Because you're like, okay, well, no one's written me this guidebook of like, and it was the same with founding a company, right? I was like, oh my God, but no one's built what I'm building. So who do I call to there's no one, right? It's like, you have to be the first one. As soon as you say what you're doing, people will follow.
What motivates you?
Like day to day? A few things. I remember reading this article about founders saying you need a high degree of self-exceptionalism, which is so problematic. I think we all do. I think you genuinely have to believe that you are so good at what you do. And if you don't feel that, you have to convince yourself you are. There are so many times I don't feel particularly good at my job, or there are smarter people. But I think consistently believing in yourself and like motivating yourself to do everything is a big one. And then actually my mum and my dad, which is such a lame answer. I was like, can I not do something better than that? But my mum is a 2-time founder. She exited her first company before 30.
Love it.
And I have seen when my mum founded her recent company in the period space, no one was talking about it, right? And then suddenly I had this mother on like Sky News being like, let me tell you about my first period. And I was so embarrassed. But now I'm like, oh my God, like you are the reason I do what I do. When I came out of college, I had an amazing job offer in private equity. And I remember both my parents being like, do you want it? And I was like, I want to start a company. They were like, okay, live at home, don't pay rent, give it 2 years. And I think having people like that in your corner, like you want to do it for them.
Oh, the power of role models.
Seriously.
Love it so much.
It's a bit of a lame one. Everyone's like, role models are way more impressive than my mum. And I'm like, I love my mum.
I think your mom is great.
She's awesome.
Mike Hanjo, how did you decide what you want to build? Like, what was the discovery ideation process like? Or did you always know that this is something that, I want to go after?
So for context, this isn't my first startup. I started my first one in college in the natural language processing. Very random.
Ooh.
Yeah, in publishing voice-to-text books. And did that for a few years, did pretty well. And then came back to London straight after the pandemic and basically looked at all the mental health stats after leaving the space for a decade and was like, how did everything I did in education 10 years not work? I was like, nothing had worked. It was like 10x worse than when I left it. And I was like, okay, well, I now know what to do with tech. I now feel like I have some form of, not like reputation, but people will back me if I try. Why don't I give it a go? I had no idea what I wanted to build. None. And I got asked by EF to join Entrepreneur First. And they went in, they were like, what are you building? And I was like, consumer mental health. And they were like,
good luck.
It's a new space. It's new for us because, this is like the Web3 boom as well. And I was this female founder being like, I want to build games. Went into EF, had no idea what I wanted to build. All I knew was that the 2 tenets I really wanted to focus on were prevention and personalization. And I think they were the mistakes I made in education, was that you can't give a class or a lesson to every child and it's exactly the same and go, yeah, but they're all going to get better based on the same thing. So I went into EF being like, how can I find something personalized and preventative went through a number of ideas. I mean, when we first met, I was building games for kids.
I remember that.
Yeah, there's a reason she didn't fund me. um, but I was looking at trying to deliver insights to parents to allow them to know their kid better. And then very quickly realized within a year that actually the problem is more systemic than that, right? There are massive problems in healthcare with misdiagnosis and triaging. And I was like, I can help clinicians diagnose better and treat patients better. So now end up actually doing kind of pre-diagnostic work for ADHD, autism and their comorbidities, but also allowing parents to find exactly the best care for them. So we've now built an algorithm that based on clinical assessments, we can automatically refer children and parents to the best help they need.
I think when it comes to mental health in particular, like the comorbidity, is such a big problem because it's not like, when you have a heart disease, like there's certain very clear, biomarkers basically that you can test for. With mental health, it's usually a spectrum. And so often it's, what the DSM-5, it's like if you score 4 out of 8, you're clinically depressed. If you score 3, you're totally fine.
Yeah.
Like, okay, how is that ever possible?
Well, everyone ignores sub-thresholds, right? Which is a problem because eventually where does that sub-threshold go? It goes from your 4 to your 5. And then you're like, well, what could I have done between the 4 and the 5 to stop them getting to a 5? And everyone ignores that. And then with, those assessments, and the reason we do multiple and build our own is that, actually I can use an example. So I got treated with an eating disorder at 16. I clearly had ADHD, right? I was diagnosed 10 years later with ADHD. The comorbidities between ADHD and eating disorders are so high. And at no point did any clinician go, let's look at what other comorbidities are around so we can slightly treat her better. So I ended up then, again, at 24, 25, having to go back to therapy, get an ADHD assessment, which costs God knows how much, and do it all over again. And I think for us, we do not treat mental health holistically at all, which is so problematic. It's like, when we think about a human body, we don't just go, we need legs to walk. We also need arms to walk, and we need like a head to think. And we're suddenly being like, okay, let's treat OCD in isolation to depression and depression in isolation to anxiety. All these things are intrinsically linked.
Totally. And I mean, up to, a few years ago, it's still like not that we don't treat it, like we don't even talk about it, right? I mean, now things are better with like the headspaces of the world, but 5-10 years ago, it's like, what, mental health? Like, do you, is that totally, I think. And you also found, so in EF, so you did EF, and you also found a co-founder there. Is that right?
I did. So Stefan, my former co-founder, but still very much involved with the company, I met him on EF. And at the time, he was the perfect person. He's an amazing person, but we're building a very different business now. And definitely the last 6 months of navigating, finding a new co-founder alone as a female founder have been probably one of the hardest 6 months ever, really.
I wonder, it's like, can you hire for a co-founder? It's not, I mean, it's difficult, right? Because it's almost like it's got to be some kind of mission-led starting and then yet sometimes it's just a situation that, you need to go through a formal process, right?
So I remember I was like, I'm going to go through my network first. But I was like, okay, well, this is going to be a terrible sales pitch. I mean, we have some money, but we have some reputation on a company that I'm now deciding to pivot without a team. I let some of my team go for a few months. They can't have half the equity because I built up a company with, people that have actually paid to use our product. They're going to have to really believe in what I'm doing. And the first person I brought in, I was so desperate to have him. I flew him over. I got him, this is how desperate I was. I was like, okay, I can't afford him to stay in a hotel. So I randomly asked a hinge date of mine if he could house this random man from UCLA to come and sleep in his house. And he was like, sure, I'll do it for £100.
It's a real entrepreneurial spirit.
So I got this random man from LA to come and sleep at the house of this former hinge date that I went on one date with. He did it for fun.
Must have been a great date, though.
Oh, no, it really was. Like, we're friends. That was kind of it.
You definitely left an impression.
He gives me free legal advice. And was like, I'm going to do anything to get this man to stay. And that week felt like a sales pitch, actually. I was like, I'm trying to persuade him that everything's great. And I was like, but he's going to turn up and it's not going to be great. It's going to be really messy. And I didn't think he was the best fit. And I don't think he thought he was the best fit. So the second time round, I was like, I'm going to be so honest about where we are. And I got connected to this woman who's now my co-founder called Dipti. She's a mother. She came from Microsoft where she'd been there for a decade. So you can imagine the salary discrepancy was quite high. Like she's probably getting 1/20th of what she was getting there. And I described everything to her. I was like, look, I want to rebuild everything from scratch. I want to get a new head of ops in. We now have, you might know Angus, from who was formerly at Pembroke. And I was like, it's going to be a brand new team and a brand new product. And I actually don't want anything to do with development. I was like, I don't want to lead product meetings. I've done that before. It's not my forte. And she comes up to me. She was like, I'm in. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, I'm a parent. I didn't realize how fucking hard it was. And she was like, I have tried building a startup in the past and I can't sell. And she was like, you've come to me being honest and sold me it. So she was like, if you let me build and you can sell, I will do it. And it's now been 3 months and she moved from SF to London with her whole family and her child. And it has been, she's like the fit. She is like the perfect, she's like the person I always needed.
I feel like the power of honesty, authenticity. I mean, do you see any differences between female leaders and male counterparts?
Yeah, I'm not going to say in terms of my team, because actually my team are amazing. I think, yeah, I've often felt the need to lie, actually, if I'm really honest, and like, let's say I'm in an investment meeting or something, we're raising again in February and someone says, how's it going?
Yeah.
It's obviously not going that well, right? Like, it's never going well. And I think like things are going better than they have been for us and they're exciting. But like, do I get up every day and go, woohoo, I have the best job in the world? No, but there's a reason I'm still doing it. And I think for me, I felt this continuous like desire not to ask for help when I had so much help available. And I think one thing I've learned with my new co-founder is actually asking for help is appreciated. It's not seen as a weakness for her. She's like, she always texts me. She's like, stop taking on more responsibility. She was like, you don't need to. And I think as a woman, because it is harder to get to even like where we are, right? So I feel like consistently you have to prove that you belong there. And that comes from, I'm working longer hours than you and I'm doing more than this and I'm going to go to every event. And at some point I'm like, who am I actually doing this for? Because I don't think many people actually care.
And funny enough, the more, I think there are even studies on that women leaders often take on more of an admin work internally, which then, puts a lot of burden basically in terms of hours, but is not necessarily seen as high impact work. Yeah. And so then it's almost like we create a problem for ourselves, right? Trying to be more efficient and more sort of helpful, we end up just taking too much on. So then we can't deliver on like the high impact stuff, right?
And I think also acknowledging what you're bad at. Like I've never wanted to admit that I'm bad at things. I am bad at a lot of things. Admin being one of them, right? I remember like one of the stories my team find hilarious. The first round we did straight out of EF, I accidentally, so basically some of our investors thought our lawyers weren't great and our lawyers didn't really like our investors. Basically it was a bit messy and I accidentally sent an email to the lawyers that basically said, don't worry, they're fucking shit, I'll fire them soon. And it went straight to my lawyers. And on the call, he was like, unsend. But I didn't know. And then I get on the phone with the lawyers and they were like, is there something you want to tell us? And I was like, huh? And they were like, that we're fucking shit. And I was like, oh my God. So now I have a team that know that sometimes I shouldn't be conversating with lawyers. Right? And I think it's instead of lying about all the things you can do, find people that can do it better.
Totally. And I think that requires a level of, I feel like for women leaders, often it's like, for men, it's like, it's about me. I'm the leader. I'm the man. Whereas women, I think we often look at the collective. Yeah. It's like, it's not about me, it's about us. And so division of work, splitting responsibilities, delegating, like being stronger together as a team, I think often has so many qualities that are usually overlooked, right? And not as appreciated, but equally, or and sometimes even more, can be even more powerful when it comes to the team, the company building.
And I think, women have always, and I've said this to my mum, it's like, I've always felt like I need to ask permission to do things. And in my team, I've kind of got the new language of being like, do not ask me for permission. Like, please do not. Unless it's legally binding that like I'm going into something I don't know about. If you believe it's the right thing, do it because that's the reason I hired you. So, when someone says like, is this an okay LinkedIn to post? I'm like, I don't care.
Just do it.
I was like, I actually don't care. Like, I need to learn to stop asking for permission. And that means that other people around me need to do the same thing.
Do you ever get imposter syndrome?
I think I pretend not to. So like if you meet me, you would assume the complete opposite. Like I'm very loud and that is who I am. But I do think it like some form of masking. Like there are multiple times we were on a call today with one of the research departments at like UCL or King's, and they were talking about Bayesian modeling and all these things. And I just kind of sat there and was talking about it, being like, I have no fucking know what they're talking about, and this is my company, and this is what we're literally doing in the research. And my brother actually is leading our research right now, and that's his area of speciality. So he just covered it up and just he ran the conversation. I just sat there, and at those moments, I'm like, I can either pretend that I know exactly what's going on, or I can just put my hand up and be like, my brother's here for this reason. So I'm learning to accept when I don't know. But I think there are a lot of moments where I'm like, I'm not that successful. Like, I'm not. If you look at like other founders or other women, I'm like, they are so much more impressive and so much cooler. So whenever someone says like, you're doing amazingly, or like Kanjo's doing this, I'm like, do I tell them that we're not? Like, how am I meant to navigate this? But I think the way I've undone that is being honest about where I'm at. Like the reason people get imposter syndrome often a lot of the time, or especially for me, was that I'd kind of put myself on this pedestal and wanted people to believe that I was on it. And I'm not. And I think as soon as I can accept that, I can actually start accepting the compliments for the place that I'm in.
It's a self-acceptance, right? It's the sort of, I don't care what others are doing. I'm not going to look elsewhere and compete. I'm just going to focus on the task at hand, and I'm going to focus on me being better today than I was yesterday, right? And that's all that matters, because in that case, it's not external. Like, you own your power, right?
Yeah. And accepting that, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And I think that was a big thing with my therapist. I remember when me and Stefan parted ways, I was like, God, we do not have that much. Like, we were waiting for money in the Middle East. I had very little going on. And then I remember speaking to my therapist being like, oh my God, what's going to happen if, the money doesn't come in, or I can't find a co-founder? And I was like, my life's over. She was like, is it? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I've raised money and people expect me to build this unicorn. And she was like, but what's actually going to happen? If it all goes to shit, what happens? And then she was like, you failed. Did anyone die? I was like, no. She was like, did you? And she was like, what would you in your dream world do after this? And I was like, maybe start a new one, or do a private members club, like write a book.
Like, there's a life beyond, right? There's another story, another chapter to be written.
And I think that's this big thing that I think also has made me struggle with building a company, is that I felt like I had to reject the other part of myself that existed outside of being a founder. Whenever you go to like work events, I'm like, but what was if I want to tell you that I ran? Or like, what was if I want to talk about my dogs and I don't want to talk about KPIs and growth? And like, that's not me. It can be me for half the day or 3/4 of the day, but like, I am forgetting the person I am outside of that. And that's something I think we all do. Like, I don't think that's, like, you're very different. Like, I don't think we've ever spoken about work outside of one work call, but we are expected all the time to be this like symbol of what our company represents. But as a result, the symbol of like who we are gets smaller and smaller.
Totally.
And that, I think, is really, really hard, especially for women.
And in this particular environment, it can all be so transactional and quick. And like, the more people the more projects you meet. And at the end of the day, it's about I believe those deeper, meaningful conversations that often, don't have an agenda, and often go to places where you might not even have thought that you'd go, in a business setting. And I think that's a power of true connection, that at the end of the day, whether you're building a company, like, it's a long-term relationship, right? You cannot fire your investors. So, or either, even more so with your co-founders. So having someone that, you can really see kind of building together for a long haul is just, it's the key.
Yeah. Well, it's always like, my mum always says this about friends. It's like, who's going to be the person that comes in, if your car breaks down, which one's going to be the one that comes and drives and gets you? And you actually start realizing very few will do it. Very few will wake up in the middle of the night and drive you. And that's also the way I viewed like my investors and my team, was like, if I did get stuck in the middle of the night, which one would come and pick me up, even if my company failed?
Totally.
Right. And that's the people I've now decided to surround myself with.
Love it. Well, hopefully we don't get stuck, but
I can't drive, so I'm not going to get anywhere.
Problem solved. Anyway, thank you so much for coming over. It was super awesome to have you here.
Thank you for having me.